think this is our third event of the day. We have some great programs at Witty. We're excited to have Allison and Beth here with us. Allison, I think the first time we met was at NASDAQ. We rang the bell, right?
That's exactly right. That was so exciting.
Totally. Dr. Ruth joined us and everything.
Yes, so I held her purse. Yes.
Everybody had an assignment from Dr. Ruth, I think, which is amazing. Before we get going, Allison and Beth, love for you just to give, because I know you're both authors and have such an extensive bio. So I thought maybe I'd just give each of you a chance. First, introduce yourselves and share the latest. Allison, would you like to go first?
Sure, Dave, thank you for having me. So I've spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector. I had a first career in program evaluation and measurement. I started an organization, Innovation Network in DC, that's still up and going. And then in the early 2000s, I began to research and write about the intersection of digital tech and social good. I wrote my first book in 2006, I think it was, Momentum, and that's how Beth and I met. She was the first blogger to review the book. We've worked together on and off since that time. I've written 3 subsequent books, including The Smart Nonprofit that Beth has behind her head that we're going to talk about tonight. I've been on the National Board of NARAL Pro-Choice America Foundation and a founding board member of Civic Hall here in New York.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for sharing. Beth, would you like to go next?
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting us here today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And anytime I get a chance to be with my favorite thought partner and collaborator, Allison, I'm always really happy. So I've dedicated, like Allison, I've dedicated my whole career in the nonprofit sector. I had a first career as a classical flutist, but I quickly switched over to working behind the scenes at the Boston Symphony and running orchestras. And I was actually an early pioneer in online networks, working for the New York Foundation for the Arts, their ArtsWire project. And that's where, and this is like 30-ish years ago, how I sort of was introduced to the internet. And I didn't invent it, but I got really excited about it and the power of it. And from there, of course, I was an early adopter of social media. Way early 2000, 2001, 2003, started blogging. That's how Alice and I first connected. My whole career in nonprofit tech has been as a trainer or working with organizations around what's needed to strategically adopt different technology tools for their mission-driven work. I've written 4 books, 2 of them with Allison. The first one was The Network Nonprofit, and I did that while I was visiting scholar at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation out here in the West Silicon Valley, where I'm based right now. And my third book, which you can see, I guess, this way. I haven't quite gotten the mirror imaging correct. The Happy Healthy Nonprofit is on workplace well-being and work-life balance. I wrote that 6 or 7 years ago when I felt like I was the lonely wolf screaming in the canyon about the value of work-life balance and well-being. Of course, attitudes about that have changed in the last couple of years. And then I've written The Smart Nonprofit with Allison, and that's what we'll be talking about.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, and I would, I know technology's come such a long way with, I came from the early PC software days, and then the web browser came out and all these things. And I know, as different catastrophes happen and especially nonprofits and any organizations really need to be nimble now and leverage all of the new tools and tech that's out there. I'd love for one of you to take the first question is, why did you write this book? Was there something you kind of saw as far as timing goes, or please?
So I'll start. We began to look at what we call smart tech, which is an umbrella term for AI and machine learning and robotics and other forms of advanced digital tech about 3 or 4 years ago. For the Gates Foundation, we were looking at the way that smart tech could unleash donations and generosity. And what we saw, Dave, was what we had seen a decade earlier with social media. Was we were right at that inflection point where the costs of the technology was coming down really, really quickly. while the power was going up at the same time. And there was a whole burst of commercial products that were coming online that everyday people and organizations could use. And this technology is so much more powerful than anything regular folks have ever had before, because it is making decisions for and instead of people. And so now we're seeing products in marketing, communications, fundraising, accounting, all throughout every company, every organization, where people are grabbing the technology off the shelf and may not fully understand what happens when you automate functions that only people could do a few years ago. And that's why we decided to really dig into this topic and write this book.
Awesome. And Beth, do you want to add to that? Like, are there things, Allison spoke to some of it, right? But I feel like there's also different pieces to the puzzle, and now you can buy a lot of different things. But please. And what have you seen, like the users, you're on mute. What have you seen the, like users adapting, and are they using a lot of the tools out there? I guess would be my question.
That's a great question. So I think I'll add, Allison laid it out so beautifully. It's hard to make it better, but I just want to sort of expand on the term smart tech. And we didn't coin the term, but we kind of decided to use it. We have been studying artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of its different cousins and variations, like chatbots and robots and natural language processing, and how the nonprofit sector was, applying and using these tools, from everything from program delivery to big partnerships with tech companies, and of course fundraising and marketing. And our work over the last 15 years has really been geared at nonprofit leaders, because again, it's not just a technical problem, particularly with this smart tech. And we noticed that every time we use the term artificial intelligence, leaders would kind of back up and like, well, I don't know how to code this. I don't do that. And so we realized we needed to describe this technology in a more user-friendly way. So we came up with smart tech, and that's because it does a lot of things, as Allison mentioned, that only people could do before. And a lot of those things are things like analyzing huge data sets, or doing what some of us call grunt work, or soul-sucking grunt work in our jobs, which is, entering information into forms. And a lot of times in nonprofits, because they're under-resourced, they're actually cutting and pasting forms, information from one form to another, and or doing a lot of manual processing. So smart tech can automate a lot of that. But again, and that opens up a whole benefit of extra time and, to do a lot. We'll talk about that in a moment. But really, it's really important to have leaders really understand that, this is a really once in a lifetime opportunity to really transform the way that nonprofits do their work. And really, and it needs to be led by the whole organization, which includes the leaders.
Yeah, as I was reading through the book, I mean, it almost seemed like it was a book about leadership.
Yeah.
What needs to be done now, right? Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
So smart tech are the technology tools, but the book is about the smart nonprofit, right? And in order to use the technology well, organizations have to be deeply human-centered, Dave, right? That is making sure that people are always in charge, and that the needs of people are really met by the organization, and they need to be well prepared and knowledgeable and reflective. None of that happens without the leadership really leaning in to understanding what the ramifications are of having technology do what people used to do. And that's why this book, and most of our other books as well, are really about the kinds of knowledge and culture that needs to be created within organizations to use advanced digital technology. Now, this one's different. When we were talking about social media 10 years ago, Dave, the message we had to organizational leaders, company leaders, was, come on, get in, right? You can't let this chapter go by. You've got to try it out, make your accounts, dip your toes in the water. This one's different, right? Because you can't see smart tech at work, right? It's embedded in other projects. Beth likes to say it's like the refrigerator humming in the background. And there are ethical considerations, which we'll talk about in a bit, that when they happen, they're very hard to pull out of a system, right? Once it's embedded in a system. So there are really serious implications of automation and smart tech, and that's why it's much more of a leadership challenge, as we like to say, than a technical challenge.
Got it. Because I know when we think of technology and adding business to our technology, it continues to evolve, right? So it's not just about running your business. It could be interfacing with customers or donors in the nonprofit case. I mean, Beth, can you maybe speak to a little bit about that? Like how smart tech can really impact the whole 360 of your business, it sounds like?
Sure. I can give you some specific examples, and of course, they're from the nonprofit sector.
That'd be great.
One of our favorite ones that we'd like to talk about, because it really illustrates one of the important concepts that's in the book, and that's about being human-centered. It's so important. It's in the tagline, being human-centered in an automated world. And so the example is with a nonprofit called the Trevor Project, and some of you may be familiar with their work. They provide crisis counseling to LGBTQ people. And so they had a problem, and it's something that is very familiar to those that work in the nonprofit sector with limited resources and limited staff. They had more demand for their program and services than they had staff to actually deliver this counseling. And the counseling is actually delivered by volunteers who are trained by the staff. And so in order to train more volunteers, the staff, without more staff, they'd be working nights and weekends. And then soon you run into that kind of limitation of there's just no more time left to do it. So they thought, okay, so can we use smart tech? Can we use a bot to do this work? Now, they approached this in a very human-centered way, and they spent a lot of time thinking about what that problem was. And they didn't say, oh, let's just use a bot which can automatically do the counseling and replace the counselors on the front line. And no, they can't, because counseling is a very human-centered skill. A machine can't do it quite as well yet. I mean, I doubt it'll be able to do it in the future, although you might hear other narratives out there, but it requires human empathy. And also because it's a very sensitive population that's connecting with the counselors when they're in crisis, an automated technology like a bot could potentially do harm. And there's examples of that. I think about some of the one large tech company that actually put a self-learning bot out on Twitter. And the intent of it was this bot, its name was Tay, was to interact with young people to learn how to do that. And the trolls got a hold of it and turned it into a misogynist, racist, horrible, cursing entity, and they had to take it down within 24 hours. So the Trevor Project would never put a bot like this on the front line, and it was used for training simulations. So they took actual conversations that the counselors might have with actual clients, stripped it of all of the privacy information, and then they train the algorithm to be able to respond in a way that a counselor would, but it's only being used in a very controlled way to help train more counselors so they can scale their program and address that exquisite pain point.
Wow, that's amazing. Allison, I know you mentioned some of the ethical boundaries that some of this automation can where you have to be careful. Beth just gave a great example. Does anything else come to mind of maybe some other stories you profiled in the book?
Oh, sure. So look, one of our very favorite organizations is in the opening chapter. It's an organization in the Bay Area called Talking Points. And the problem that the founder, Hee-Jae Lim, was aiming to solve is that there are many, many parents for whom English is not their native language who have difficulty connecting with their students' teachers. So HJ created an app, Talking Points, to translate the communication between teachers and parents, and did so in a really, really thoughtful way, stepping very carefully, had a first iteration that had only 100 parents on it, because what she found was that you can't grab interpretation software off the shelf that would understand the nuance and the jargon and the context of the conversations. So all of those first conversations had human beings who were overseeing them to make sure that they were accurately translated. And HJ and her colleagues have grown this app so much that by 2000, they had facilitated 5 million conversations on there. And in fact, they were just one of the recipients of a grant from Mackenzie Scott. So in particular, what we love is, Beth used the phrase exquisite pain point. What HJ had identified, Dave, was that an incredible amount of school success starts with parental engagement in schools. And if they can't converse with teachers, that's never going to happen. And the Talking Points is just a great example of being human-centered, knowledgeable, and prepared and reflective.
Great, thanks for sharing. And for those that may have just joined, and I know we have many people watching the stream, Allison and Beth, this is their new book, The Smart Nonprofit, Staying Human-Centered in an Automated World. Is there data on just specifically, like, have you seen data at this point when these technologies are implemented, when they're implemented right, how much more the nonprofits can do? Like, are there straight numbers, 2 times the performance, 3 times? What is the number, or is there one yet? Do we have enough data? Right.
Oh, you're on mute, Beth.
Sorry. We'd like to have that data. There have been surveys that have come out from different vendors that have talked about, like from fundraising vendors that have talked about how much more their clients have been able to raise in terms of money, the equivalent of sales. One of them was like over 800% increase in the number of donors, or else donor retention, a whole set of metrics around fundraising. We've also seen some, and again, this is coming from the vendors. We'd like to see a sort of neutral party maybe research this. The amount of time saved that staff have been able to use and be more effective in their work. So
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, we want to be really, really clear, Dave, that we do not see smart tech as an opportunity to reduce the headcount of organizations, right? There's something in nonprofit fundraising that we call the leaky bucket problem. And this is that the donor retention rate from year 1 to year 2 is less than 25%. Right. And by year 5, you have just 5% of those original donors left. They go flying out of the bucket so fast, organizations are just frantically trying to fill the bucket up again, being very transactional. That's why your inbox is stuffed full of donation requests. What we want to see happen is that the smart tech can do tasks that are taking up an enormous amount of time, like looking for prospects in your existing database, or, on the web. There are, tools like Quilt AI that can do that, or crafting messages for donors. There's a tool like Gravity that can do that. We don't want to see staff laid off. What we want to see them do is take that 30% of time that they're saving with the good use of smart tech and now pivot to deep relationship building, right? Pick up the phone and call those donors and volunteers, tell better stories, really connect in deep ways so that you can plug up that leaky bucket.
Great. And I have one more question. Then I'd love to open it up to anybody who has a question. Feel free to raise your hand, or you can simply unmute and start speaking. I know many nonprofits may not have an IT department. Some are much smaller, right? Have you seen, for the ones that have used it successfully, have you seen common denominators around implementation or starting places? 'Cause I know some it might just be overwhelming. Sometimes your head's down, you have all your systems in place. Where do they get started?
In fact, we have a whole chapter about that in the book, called Ready, Set, Go. And again, Allison mentioned this earlier, when we were talking about social media, we were encouraging people, dip your toes in the water, experiment, fail fast, but get started. In this case, readiness is really about taking that time, to do, to find out, what is that pain point, and not just having a conversation with your staff around the table, but actually going out and talking to your clients or your donors or talking to other staff and figuring out what is their point of view about this project. It's also really important, and this is where sort of to build on the point that Allison was making about not using this technology to replace staff. It's really important that the humans are always in charge of the machines and not the other way around. And that takes time to sort of figure out what should we automate and what absolutely should be a human tasks and where are there human overrides. So there's time in getting ready for that. And then the second piece of it is picking the right tool for the job. And there's lots of options there. And that's where it might get a little bit overwhelming. But we are proposing a process where organizations are doing their due diligence and they're really selecting vendors that align with their values, and not just getting the tool that this other nonprofit down the road use, but really making sure their values align, really being able to push back and ask the right questions about those algorithms or the data sets that it was trained on, so that they're using it in an ethical and responsible way. And then finally, it's really about inching and iterating your way to scale. And Allison laid out the path that Talking Points had taken, where they started, where they're actually having humans do some of the translations just to prove the concept. And sometimes you might even learn, as you're in this kind of pilot stage where, okay, this could potentially do harm, or we're not solving the right pain point here, and we need to pivot. And again, this is another sort of mindset change that nonprofits need to do, to think about this as a learning and iteration and continuous improvement process, rather than going big and getting it right away.
Got it. And let me just ask one other question. I lied on my last one. Where do you see, or have you seen common denominators, right? I'm sure not everybody's going from 0 to 100 as far as implementation, right? So is it first, let me kind of manage my social a little bit, or get my just accounting system and operations piece? Have you seen common denominators about where they're kind of starting from, if that makes sense?
I have, and I'll let Allison make it better, right?
Yeah.
Right? Fundraising, I tend to see, I've seen the fundraising offices start first because they're able to potentially more tangibly see the return on investment, better donor relationships and increased dollars raised. So there's a good ROI argument. I've also seen a lot, particularly in because I do a lot of work in workplace well-being. A lot of organizations, nonprofits, don't have a dedicated HR function, and automated HR apps are one of the largest growing areas. So that's another area, easy kind of entry into it.
A place we've seen an enormous amount of activity, Dave, are in chatbots. Because even if you've got those FAQs up on your website, there's something very inviting about having those same questions go to a bot in that conversational format. So it saves staff an enormous amount of not just time, but the constant interruption of, what time are you open? Can I drop off something at this time, or whatever your regular questions are. Chatbots are an inexpensive, easy way to save staff an enormous amount of time, but they have to be well programmed to make sure that they're asking, they're answering the questions that your people have well. right? If you're not asking your users and stepping very carefully, how did it feel to engage with that chatbot? And did you feel like you just got into like phone tree hell? It's not going to go well for you.
Right.
Right.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it almost seems like many of these things you're talking about, I'm sure for all small businesses, as we all are.
That's right.
And through the last 3 years and then are coming out of it. So many of these tools can be helpful, I think, for all of us. I'd love to open it up to any questions from anybody in the audience. I'll give them a minute. Lamondre, billion strong. Any chatbots there?
No chatbots or anything like that. I mean, we're new and we're still trying to do that. But something very interesting. I love the fact that you said this really feels like a leadership book. And one of the things that I have learned, just especially in the inclusion space, is that unless you really get buy-in from the leadership of it, it's really hard to implement any kind of real initiative that's out there. Having said that, much of what we focus on is the inclusion of people with disabilities. And so often, as you know, particularly when we talk about automation and when you talk about bots, it really is exclusive when it comes to dealing with disabilities in many forms. But my question would be, what in your research, what has been the commitment to inclusivity as it relates to disability when adopting these kinds of technologies and keeping it human?
Mm-hmm.
Great question. Has that come across? Did that come up with any of the companies that you may have profiled in the book, Allison? Excuse me.
Actually, it did, and I'm going to throw this question to Beth, who can tell you about very specific ways that smart tech is helping with inclusivity.
Sure. So the one example that just came to mind, popped into my head was, and it's a large government organization. It's the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections in California, which has many different facilities across the state. And they're delivering healthcare services and other types of services, and there were many different manual processes. And one of the things that they were able to accomplish by being able to automate some of the filling in of forms or the getting the prescription orders to the pharmacy, to the facility pharmacy electronically instead of on paper, was that they were able to build in voice to text interfaces so that people who could not see could hear. And they were able to expand their inclusivity in terms of hiring. But Lamont, I think that there's a lot more that the nonprofit sector can do to pay attention to this issue of inclusion, especially with people with disabilities. We've come a long way, I think, in the nonprofit sector, but I think we can do a lot more. And just even little things that I notice. For example, I was really glad to see that here we're on Zoom and that the live captioning was enabled. Okay. And that's a feature that people who experience loss of hearing or hard of hearing or experiencing deafness, they rely on that, right? And so, you have to turn it on, and many people aren't even aware of that. So in that way, they're being, in a really small way, they're being exclusionary in a big way. So I think that there's a lot more education that needs to happen. And certainly in the book, we do cover some examples of how this technology can make nonprofit work and services more accessible to and clients and users, staff, and even donors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we do donate. As people with disabilities, we do donate. And I will tell you just, and then I'll hush. But it is really interesting. And while those kinds of things have made some significant openings, there is a lot of work that we still have to do. Because I've even noticed that there are times when, new technologies come out and things are better for most people, it makes it less accessible for others. And I'll just give you a real quick prime example about mobile apps that a lot of organizations are now using, particularly when you're inputting your information. And I have, my disability is spinal muscular atrophy. I have very little use of anything from my neck down. So I rely on voice dictation to help me navigate the web and fill in forms and all those kinds of things. Well, on my mobile phone, one of the issues that I've run into, and this is something that has been recent, particularly if they're asking you to input a state or a date, they'll have you, when you click on the date section, it'll bring up the scroll menu where you literally have to scroll the different sections to it. There's no way for me to do that. No way for me to do that. And that's something that's newer. It wasn't like that before, but that's something that's newer. And it's everywhere. It's pervasive. And it's amazing to me how many organizations have adopted this. And it's for people like me, it's simply not usable. So I can't navigate those kinds of fields independently. So while we have seen some significant gains, there are also new challenges that are being erected that could really be very simply corrected, but people simply don't start with that form of inclusion in mind. So I think that we really have to bring that to the forefront and telling those stories of why that kind of inclusion is so important. Thank you.
For sure. And I think
Story. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think with books like what you're doing, Allison and Beth, there could be ways to, as Billion Strong might even come up with solutions for these things to really empower some of the other groups. Lamondre, just give a quick overview of what you're doing, if you don't mind. So I'd love for everybody watching this, because I know you guys are doing such amazing work. So I just want to give you the floor for a minute.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. Billion Strong is a global identity movement for people with disabilities. Our goals are quite simple. It is to unite the global community of people with disabilities. There's 1.3 billion people on the planet that identify as having a disability. We recognize that that is a very conservative number, though. But a part of what we want to do is to empower the community and elevate the community through educating not just people with disabilities, but the rest of the world about disability issues. And that really does include what we're talking about here, accessible technology. And when I say that, our goal is not necessarily to tell people this is accessible and this is not, or this is how you make it accessible, although we do that and we have all the resources to do that. But it's about what your book is about. It really is about how do you do that in a human way? How do you make it usable for people? And so we offer educational opportunities. We offer partnering. And even though it may not necessarily be something that we will do directly, we have the connections to get you in contact with the right people to do that, because we use technologists who are people with disabilities, and we're partnered with Root Global. That's what they do. That's who they are. So, so we have those resources, and we would love to speak with anybody who has an interest in this, because this is real inclusion. This is if you make it better for people with disabilities, you make it better for everyone, and it's just that simple.
That's brilliant.
And if you want to contact us, billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org, and you can contact me directly, Lamondre at billion-strong.org. Thank you.
Awesome. Lamondre, thanks so much. All right. Anybody else have a question they'd like to share or ask?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, great session. So I have a question. It's non-profits like other organizations have to deal with regulations. So this is smart tech. Is it also helping with complying with these regulations? And what the nonprofit leaders need to know about those?
Could you elaborate a little bit more? These regulations for government contracts or like OSHA regulations?
Mostly like laws and regulations, like healthcare. They have to comply with HIPAA.
Yeah.
And then PCI DSS. So is there anything specific for nonprofits which people who want to start nonprofit should be aware of?
In regards to how to use smart tech?
Yeah, in regards to just complying with anything which is needed for nonprofit to survive.
So I'm not, expert on the general field of those regulations, but you raise a fascinating point, which is the fact that this technology commercially is racing far ahead of any regulatory body right now. So for instance, I'm going to tell you something that's going to keep you up at night, a little bit worried tonight. So I'm sorry, maybe you'll watch a sitcom or something. But right now, the Pentagon is experimenting with automated, autonomous lethal weapons, right? So we know what drone warfare has done, which is it's made it easier in some ways to attack other people because, your people are not involved. However, existing drone warfare, drone armaments have to be activated by a person. What the Pentagon is experimenting with are weapons that will take off and decide for themselves whether, when, and how to be lethal, right?
Okay.
Who's going to decide these issues of when bots are going to make decisions and when people aren't? So for instance, in a healthcare setting, when we have robots who are going to, be doing nighttime nursing, because we have a huge shortage of nurses now, right? When are those bots going to be allowed to make decisions about in regards to medication, with or without human oversight? There are a whole host of ethical issues like that. And what we don't have right now is a clear understanding of exactly who is going to make that determination of where that line is going to be between people and bots.
Right.
Right?
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Neha. All right. Any other questions for Alice or Beth while we have them?
I have a quick question. Maybe I'm not sure if it is not relevant, please ignore. What is your take on, I know you talked about chatbots a lot. What is your take on chatbot versus a virtual assistant?
I don't know, Allison, if you want to take this first, or do you want me to go?
You go. I'll jump in.
Well, it's really interesting. I've been experimenting with a lot of these tools, as a small business person, essentially, or solopreneur. There's a host of tools that can make my life easier in terms of scheduling. And some of the administrative work. And one of them actually is right here in this meeting right now. You'll see Beth's Otter AI note taker. And what that is it's a simple tool that can go to meetings for you. I didn't realize this, it just logs in separately. And it might even be saying things in the chat, who knows? But it's asking things like, are there any questions for Beth? What are the takeaways? And what it does is it uses voice to text translator, natural language processing, similar to the technology that's behind live transcriptions that people who are experiencing deafness or hard of hearing rely on. And it's letting everybody know that this transcript is being made, and it even has supplied a link. I don't know how well the assistant's been doing. I'll have to check the chat. Again, I'm experimenting with it, and it does a transcript of like what was said. And for me, in my regular course of meetings, it's been really helpful that I don't have to take copious notes, that I can go back to it. It will also summarize the key points. Now, it doesn't always get them right. I have to go in and edit them. And it has a record. So I think that's been really helpful. I think it needs some fine tuning, this particular tool, as far as I can see. There's another tool called Calendarly. In fact, many of you may be using it. That also uses a machine learning algorithm to look at my schedule and, and serve up a couple of free dates to people. And that has eliminated a lot of back and forth emails. I don't know if any of you all can relate to this exquisite pain point, trying to find the time when you're all free to have the meeting. And that can just take up a lot of exhausting, soul-sucking kind of, task, right? So I think virtual assistants can be, if they're designed well, and if you understand that you have to, as the human, like supervise them and understand that they're, what their output might be, might need some editing or selection.
So the virtual assistants are the internal tools, and the chatbot is the external tool. It's the tool that's outside, that's client facing, that is often on, a company's website. I'm sure you've interacted with them already. Let's say that you go to return a pair of shoes, and then there's a little button that says, you can chat with us 24/7. And it will answer rote questions that are, regular, like, how do I do this? Where do I mail it? And so on. And when it gets stuck, it will say, okay, now I need to send you, to a person. So those chatbots externally are taking up all of that, or a chunk of the customer service time that so many staff people find most of their, a lot of their days eaten up with.
That's great. And I didn't know that, Calendly had would kind of go out and see what's on your calendar. I've been thinking about implementing it. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I can now manage 2 calendars. So that's a great tip. Wow, I didn't realize that. Excellent. Becky put a question in the chat, and Becky, you can ask it if you'd like, or I'll read it for you. But what are the security issues around bots? Like, have you seen, she mentioned she got something in the email group related to a free bot for me, but I deleted it because I was concerned about what bots have access to you if you use them. I don't think we covered this yet. Have you seen any kind of bots gone crazy type scenarios, or?
You go, Beth, on that.
I was going to say, it would be helpful to understand exactly a little bit more of the context of, was this just a company that makes bots that offered you a free bot? Was it part of something that you signed up for, or is it part of a listserv or a Slack channel?
We're going to bring Becky up to ask that and let us know. Hey, Becky.
Hey, Becky.
Hi. What this actually was, and I don't know where it came from. Maybe it's because I check out real estate on Zillow once in a while, but all of a sudden I got this email from someone saying, we created a bot for you so that you can go out and it'll check out good deals for you and use our bot. And that's what it was designed to do, is to go out and like look at different real estate deals in my area, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So look, smart tech that's being commercialized oftentimes has the same extractive data DNA as the commercial social media platforms that we've seen over the last 15 years, right? Their job is to, suck up as much of your data as possible and then turn around and either use it internally to sell you more stuff or sell it to other people, right? That model of data extraction is being built into these new tools as well. And the shame for us is that because we didn't deal with the problems from the last chapter in digital tech, it's now being paid forward into all of these new models and new technologies. So your job, Becky, is what it always has been, which is to, make yourself knowledgeable about whatever tools you're using. Be careful about sharing your own data and have your own ethos about what you want to share and what you don't. It's still up to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with those things with the bots, in all honesty. So it's nice to learn about it because I'm always very careful, and I just deleted everything to do with that offer right away.
Especially if it's something that came to you versus something you signed up for. But I still think that we don't have enough, I don't want to say regulation, but there's a lot of the companies don't have ethical guidelines, right? And I think about one example early on that Alice and I it would make the back of the hair on the back of our neck stand up. It was a chat bot that was a therapist And I'm blanking on the name
Wobot.
of it. Oh, yeah,
Wobot.
right. Wobot, right. That you could sign up and you could, you don't need to go to a therapist. You could just chat with this, Wobot. But there were no ethical kind of guidelines around it. It was a for-profit company. Like, what are they could be selling their data to an antidepressant drug company for all we know, right?
Right.
And here we've just opted into it. So it behooves us to be really careful consumers of these products, whether we're individuals, small business people, or working at nonprofits.
I'd like to spend a few minutes, Dave, if you don't mind, talking about racial bias built into smart tech as well.
That'd be great.
So, yeah. So this is a huge problem. There are two reasons how and why racial bias is being baked into smart tech products. Number one, at some point in time, a programmer had to create the code, and they have to build their own assumptions into it. So for instance, if we're talking about approving people for mortgages, that coder is making assumptions about what a safe, quote, safe mortgage applicant looks like, right? And likely it has something to do with zip code, which, as we know, has something to do with race. So there's that issue. Then the second problem is it takes what we call Library of Congress-sized data sets to train smart tech to look for patterns. Those data sets that are historic in an area like housing or food have racism built all throughout them, right? The history of mortgage lending in this country is racist. So now you've got two reasons why a tool that screens people for mortgages already has racist criteria built into it. There is going to be bias in tools that are screening people for, screening resumes for companies, that are screening people for any kinds of services, that are screening for financial services, and so on. This is why we are so adamant that people who are using smart tech need to be knowledgeable and prepared to use it, because you can't take the bias out of it. All you can try to do is to mitigate it, to understand it, and to mitigate it in your use. It's also why Beth, when a few minutes ago, was talking about selecting values-aligned vendors. So Beth, Dave, let me use a bakery analogy, right? If you went to a bakery and said, "I'd like that chocolate cake," and they bring out the cake, and you say, "Yeah, but hang on, I'm allergic to to wheat. Does that cake have wheat?" And they said, "Well, we baked it using a proprietary recipe, so you just have to take it, right? We're not going to tell you what's in it." When you buy a black box product, smart tech, and the company says, "We can't tell you how we made it or what's in it or what the assumptions are or what the code is, because that's all proprietary," that's the same as telling you, "We're not going to tell you if the cake is going to make you sick or not." So there are lots and lots of products out there. You ought to find one made by a group that is willing to tell you how it was made, how it was tested for bias, and how they can help you to mitigate any bias that might be in it.
Thank you. No, we're looking quite a bit in just bias in AI as we're updating. Our research team's updating the glass ceiling report and looking at glass ceiling 2.0 and just how that's affecting human capital, kind of, nonprofit, for-profit, big company, small company, and all of us on the planet. So
that's exactly right.
Thanks for that.
We've seen this, this kind of bias all over the place. Facial recognition software is deeply biased against Black and brown people. Software used to set bail and sentencing and courts are biased against people. There's a new kind of smart tech tool that police departments are using across the country called PredPol, P-R-E-D, Pol, P-O-L, for predictive policing. It actually sounds like predatory policing to me, but the idea is it's going to gather data to predict where and when crime is going to happen so that police departments can put their resources there. All it does, Dave, is feed this algorithm more and more data about those trouble spots. And you just create like a police state in those areas. It's just dreadful. So we need to be super careful about how we're implementing these tools.
For sure. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. This was amazing. Allison, Beth, where can everybody find you? Where do they go to buy the book? Amazon, other places? What's the best?
We're huge fans, Dave, of this site called bookshop.org, which sends the proceeds to local bookshops. You can determine whatever bookshop you like. It's there, it's on Amazon, it's on every site. It's a really fast, easy read. And we hope that folks will buy it and give it as gifts. I'm at AllisonFine.com.
And I'm at bethkanter.org, KANTER.org.
Awesome.
And we're on all the social media channels. If you have a question, just reach out to us. We're so happy, Dave, to be participating in this event with our really dear friends at Witty. We're just huge fans.
Thank you. Likewise. And yeah, maybe we'll continue this in a few months after a lot of data's come back. How nonprofits can kind of share some of the platforms, as Lamondre mentioned, tools they may have to solve some of these issues. Let's share. Thank you. In 5 minutes, we do have our Thursday night clubhouse starting. I'll put the link in the chat. Shut them down. Solutions for Black women in the workplace is on Clubhouse. Join us every Thursday night at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 Eastern. Beth and Allison, thank you so much. We really appreciate you both. And great rest of your week, everybody.
I have a quick question.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, Robert's got a question.
Well, first of all, I'm so jealous of you smart ladies. It's not even funny. And I thought I knew something till I got on this call. But how can I get a recording of this? Because I have teenagers that volunteer here and they're involved in the technology, and I would like to be able to share this with them.
Sure. Just contact us, Robert. Let me just stop this. Contact us at Witty in the chat. We'll get you a copy of the recording, and then we'll donate a couple of Witty memberships for the 2 young ladies that work at your organization.
All right, great.
And we'll hook you up.
All right.
David,
Yes,
can somebody put the books in the chat so we can copy them?
Absolutely. Oh, a link to the book?
Yeah, a link to the books, or just in titles, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Let me
Mhm.
let me add that. And hold on 1 second. Yeah, Peggy, do you have it handy? Or can you put it in chat, the link to the book? Or the smart, here, I'll do it. Hold on, let me find it. Good to see you, Jay. Thanks for joining.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I thought it would be good for some of the work you're doing. Could you share while I'm looking for the book a little bit about your organization, that I know everybody will be interested, and you support nonprofits all over the world?
Oh, so our organization is an advocacy organization that supports the educators who created social emotional learning for schools, which our opinion is it's a game changer for the schools when done comprehensively, because it teaches the skills to manage life in healthy ways rather than the dysfunctional ways where eons of training child development have taught. And so you get great results in the schools when they're done well. And we're going to get great human beings who maybe take down the nukes at one point and stop all this craziness like Ukraine, and operate from a very different paradigm because they have the skills not to go into their reactive states and work from their high level creative and collaborative states of mind, conscious states of mind. So
Awesome.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah, no, totally. How can everybody find you, by the way? I'd just like to.
Our website is pretty easy to remember. It's equipourkids.org, equipourkids.org. We're a pro bono service agency, advocacy service agency for about 21 other grassroots organizations around the country that need advocacy services, media, and we help create and grow grassroots organizations where we can around the country. So there's people on the ground levels promoting this, and mostly educators. There's 14,000 educators collectively in the organizations we support.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank Thanks for sharing that. The
Thank you.
link to the books in the chat. We also put a link to equipourkids.org in the book. And thank you all for joining tonight.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your week. And we will see you in Clubhouse in a few minutes or at our next events tomorrow. Bye, everybody. Say hi to Deborah for me, Andre. Tell her I miss her.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
So that's that.